What's up, truth seekers? Before we dive into the darkest corners of history where blood meets gold, smash that like button if you think you could outsmart a medieval assassin. Hit subscribe if you want more stories that'll make you question everything you know about money, and drop a comment telling me. If you found a treasure chest but knew it was soaked in innocent blood, would you take it? Because today, we're about to discover that every fortune in history has been a crime scene in disguise. You think Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk invented ruthless wealth accumulation? Brother, they're just playing with monopoly money compared to what we're about to uncover. We're talking about a journey through the most savage, twisted, and downright diabolical ways the rich have stayed rich for over 2,000 years. This isn't your high school history class. This is CSI, Ancient Crimes Edition. So buckle up, because we're about to prove that being wealthy isn't just about having money. It's about being willing to do anything, and I mean anything, to keep it. It's ancient Mesopotamia, around 2100 BC. You've got your first cities, your first kings, and your first taste of what we'd recognize today as obscene wealth. But here's the kicker: nobody got rich by playing nice. Take King Sargon of Akkad. This dude didn't just conquer territories. He invented the playbook that every wealthy psychopath would follow for the next 4,000 years. Step 1. Claim divine right. Step 2. Tax everyone into starvation. Step 3. When they complain, make them disappear. Sound familiar? It should, because it's the exact same game plan used by everyone from Roman senators to modern pharmaceutical CEOs. Jump forward to Rome, 59 BC. Marcus Licinius Crassus, richest man in Rome, worth about $170 billion in today's money. How'd he do it? Simple. He'd show up at your house fire with his private fire brigade. But here's the twist. He wouldn't put out the fire until you sold him your property for pennies on the dollar. But that's small time compared to what came next. Crassus would buy slaves, train them as firefighters, architects, and miners, then rent them back to the city. It's like if Amazon owned the fire department, the construction company, and the workers. Oh wait, that's basically what's happening right now. And when the people got tired of his games, Crassus didn't just silence critics. He'd have them crucified along the highways as billboards advertising what happens when you mess with wealth. But let's go even further back to the first recorded case of wealth-based murder, Cain and Abel. Think about it, this wasn't just sibling rivalry. This was the world's first hostile takeover. Abel's got the better offering, the divine favor, probably the prime real estate. So what does Cain do? He doesn't compete in the marketplace. He eliminates the competition permanently. This template gets repeated throughout history with clockwork precision. Every great fortune starts with someone saying, "Why compete when I can just kill the competition?" Fast forward to medieval Europe. Those fairy tale castles we romanticize, they were basically fortified crime scenes. Lords didn't just own the land, they owned the people. And when peasants couldn't pay their crushing taxes, they didn't get evicted. They got hanged, drawn, and quartered as a warning to others. But here's where it gets really twisted. These lords would then take the confiscated property and use it to fund more conquests, more murders, more wealth. It's like a pyramid scheme where the foundation is literally made of corpses. The medieval Catholic Church? Don't even get me started. They figured out how to monetize salvation itself. Pay us or burn in hell forever. And if you can't pay, we'll help you get to hell a little faster. You want to know why income inequality feels so insurmountable today? It's because the playbook hasn't changed in 4,000 years. The methods got more sophisticated, but the mentality is identical. 1. Claim your wealth is divinely ordained. Today's version, job creators. 2. Make the system so complex that people can't understand how they're being robbed. 3. When they figure it out anyway, use violence, legal or otherwise, to maintain control. Every Bitcoin billionaire, every hedge fund prince, every tech mogul is following the exact same blood-soaked blueprint that Crassus used in Rome. The only difference is instead of crucifying people along roads, they crucify them financially and call it market forces. Alright, now we're getting to the good stuff. The Renaissance, supposed age of enlightenment, art, and culture. What they don't tell you in art class is that all that pretty marble was paid for with blood money from the most sophisticated crime families in history. Let's start with the Borgias. These weren't just your average Renaissance family. They were running the Vatican like a criminal empire. Pope Alexander VI, aka Rodrigo Borgia, turned the papacy into what was basically the world's first multinational crime syndicate. We're talking adultery, incest, theft, bribery, and murder, especially murder by arsenic poisoning. You're a cardinal in 1495, sitting down to dinner with the Pope. The wine tastes a little off, but hey, it's the Pope's wine, right? 20 minutes later, you're foaming at the mouth while Pope Alexander VI is already dividing up your property among his illegitimate children. Cesare Borgia, Alexander's son, took this family business to the next level. This dude would invite rivals to peace negotiations, then have them strangled with silk cords during the handshake. He'd throw lavish parties where the main entertainment was watching enemies get tortured to death. All of this was funding Renaissance art. That beautiful Sistine Chapel ceiling? Michelangelo painted it with murder money. Every brushstroke was subsidized by someone's assassination. Now let's talk about the Medici family, the good guys of Renaissance history, right? Wrong. These banking pioneers didn't just lend money. They bought entire governments. The Puzzi conspiracy of 1478 was literally an assassination attempt during Easter services, ending with one dead brother and a wounded Lorenzo de' Medici. But here's what's really twisted. The Medici figured out how to corrupt an entire political system without technically breaking any laws. They manipulated institutions, allowed officials to appropriate public funds, and transformed public office from civic duty into personal wealth accumulation. Sound familiar? They invented lobbying, political corruption, and corporate welfare 500 years before America even existed. The Medici Bank had branches across Europe, and each one was basically a money laundering operation. They'd finance wars on both sides, then profit from the reconstruction. It's like if JP Morgan Chase funded both World War sides, then got the contracts to rebuild everything afterward. The thing about Renaissance wealth was how creative the murders became. These families turned assassination into an art form. To poison rings, hollow rings filled with arsenic that you'd slip into someone's drink during a handshake. Trick furniture, chairs and beds rigged with hidden blades or poison needles. Hired artists, painters and sculptors who were also professional killers. Talk about a side hustle. The wealthy didn't just kill people, they made it beautiful. Elaborate poisonings that looked like natural deaths. Staged accidents that were works of art. Public executions that were theatrical performances. The Catholic Church during the Renaissance was basically the world's largest criminal organization. They were selling salvation, indulgences, running prostitution rings, financing mercenary armies, and laundering money through charitable donations. Pope Julius II, the warrior pope, personally led armies into battle while wearing full papal regalia. Picture the Pope today suiting up in body armor and leading Marines into Iraq. That's essentially what was happening. And the money? Oh, the money was flowing like wine at a Last Supper. Every cathedral, every monastery, every piece of religious art was funded by activities that would make cartel leaders blush. You think tech billionaires are ruthless today? They're playing patty cake compared to Renaissance crime families. But the parallels are terrifying. A Zuckerberg's data empire equals Medici's information networks across Europe. Amazon's monopoly tactics equals Borgia elimination of competition. Pharmaceutical price gouging equals Vatican selling salvation to the desperate. Political lobbying equals Renaissance family political manipulation. The only difference is that today's wealthy crime families wear hoodies instead of silk robes and use algorithms instead of arsenic. Here's the Renaissance lesson that every modern billionaire learned. You don't stay wealthy by being good at business. You stay wealthy by being better at crime than your competitors. The Medici lasted 300 years. The Borgias controlled the Vatican. Modern tech dynasties are following the exact same playbook. They just call it disruption instead of assassination. Buckle up, because we're about to dive into the period where wealth accumulation became industrial-scale murder. The age of exploration, more like the age of exploitation, where European crime families figured out how to monetize entire continents of human suffering. Forget everything you think you know about corporate crime. The Dutch East India Company wrote the handbook. This wasn't just a trading company. It was a sovereign nation with its own army, navy, and license to kill anyone who got in the way of profits. It's 1619 in the Banda Islands. The locals are growing nutmeg, minding their own business. The Dutch show up and make them an offer they literally can't refuse. Sell us all your nutmeg at whatever price we decide, or we'll murder everyone on the island. The Bandanese tried to negotiate. Big mistake. The Dutch didn't just kill them. They committed genocide so thorough that they had to import slaves from other islands just to keep the nutmeg plantations running. We're talking about wiping out 90% of a population to corner the spice market. And here's the kicker. This genocide was perfectly legal because the Dutch East India Company had a charter from the government. They weren't criminals. They were entrepreneurs. Just like how modern corporations get legal immunity for environmental destruction or pharmaceutical murders. Let's talk about American plantation wealth. And I mean really talk about it, not the whitewashed version they teach in school. Every single Southern gentleman was running what would today be classified as a multinational human trafficking operation. They weren't just buying slaves. They were breeding them like livestock, selling children away from parents, and calculating the exact minimum amount of food needed to keep a human being alive and working. The numbers are staggering. By 1860, American slaves represented $4 billion in assets. That's over $120 billion in today's money. These weren't just agricultural workers. They were literally the collateral for the entire American banking system. Northern banks, southern plantations, British textile mills. The entire Atlantic economy was a criminal enterprise built on industrialized torture. And when slavery ended, they didn't free the slaves. They just changed the business model to sharecropping and prison labor. The Caribbean sugar plantations were basically open-air concentration camps that happened to produce sweetener. The death rate was so high that plantation owners calculated it was cheaper to work slaves to death and buy new ones than to keep them alive. Think about that business model. Human beings were literally consumable resources. The average life expectancy of a sugar plantation slave was 7 years. 7 years of 18-hour workdays, minimal food, and maximum brutality. Also, Europeans could sweeten their tea. And the wealth? My God, the wealth. Sugar barons were living like kings while their plantations were killing fields. They built mansions in London and Paris with ballrooms bigger than most people's entire neighborhoods, all funded by systematized murder. The British East India Company makes modern pharmaceutical companies look like charity organizations. They didn't just trade with India, they conquered it, enslaved it, and stripped it of everything valuable. Here's their business model. Show up with superior weapons, demand trading rights, gradually take over local governments, then tax the population into starvation while shipping all their wealth back to Britain. The Bengal famine of 1770? That wasn't a natural disaster. That was a profit margin. The East India Company deliberately exported food during a drought, causing 10 million deaths while their stock prices soared. And when Indians fought back, the company would massacre entire villages as marketing campaigns. Mess with our profits, and this is what happens to your family. You want to know why Africa is still poor despite having more natural resources than any other continent? Because the colonial extraction model never ended. It just got more sophisticated. Modern multinational corporations use the exact same playbook. Nestle stealing water rights equals Dutch East India Company claiming spice monopolies. Big pharma price gouging equals sugar barons calculating minimum survival costs. Fast fashion sweatshops equals plantation labor with slightly better PR. Resource extraction in Africa equals colonial strip mining with corporate lawyers. Every major European city, every grand museum, every prestigious university was built with colonial blood money. The British Museum is basically a warehouse of stolen artifacts. Harvard's endowment started with slave trading profits. The Manhattan skyline, the London financial district, the Parisian boulevards, all of it was constructed with wealth extracted from systematic murder and theft across multiple continents. Here's the thing about colonial wealth. It wasn't just about taking resources. It was about breaking entire civilizations so thoroughly that they could never recover their independence. The colonizers didn't just steal gold and spices. They stole languages, cultures, entire ways of life. They created artificial borders, installed puppet governments, and designed economic systems that would keep funneling wealth to Europe for centuries after independence. And today's billionaires are doing the exact same thing, just without the ships. They're extracting wealth from entire countries through debt traps, resource monopolies, and financial manipulation that makes 18th century piracy look quaint. The colonial period proved that there's no amount of human suffering that won't be acceptable if the profit margins are high enough. And that lesson has been passed down through generations of wealth dynasties like a twisted family heirloom. Alright, now we're hitting America's golden age of unapologetic greed. The Gilded Age, when robber barons turned wealth accumulation into a blood sport and made no apologies for crushing anyone who got in their way. Let's start with the man himself, John D. Rockefeller, potentially the richest person in American history, who built his petroleum empire through Standard Oil. But calling him a businessman is like calling Al Capone a beverage distributor. Rockefeller's strategy was simple: eliminate all competition by any means necessary. He'd show up in a new town and systematically destroy every independent oil refiner through what he called good sweating, which was basically economic terrorism. Here's how it worked. Standard Oil would temporarily drop prices below cost in targeted markets, bleeding money until every competitor went bankrupt. Then, once they had a monopoly, they'd jack prices up to whatever they wanted. It was price manipulation on an industrial scale. But the really twisted part? When competitors tried to ship their oil by railroad, Rockefeller would get the railroad companies to charge them double while giving Standard Oil secret rebates. It's like if Amazon convinced UPS to destroy all packages from competitors while delivering Amazon packages for free. And if economic warfare wasn't enough, Rockefeller had no problem with actual violence. Standard Oil hired private armies to intimidate competitors, sabotage equipment, and burn down rival facilities. They were running a protection racket that would make the Italian mafia jealous. Carnegie loved to play the philanthropist later in life, but let's talk about how he really made his money. The Homestead Strike of 1892 shows you everything you need to know about Carnegie's business ethics. His steelworkers were demanding basic human rights, things like not working 12-hour shifts in 3,000-degree heat for wages that barely covered rent. Carnegie's response? He hired 300 armed Pinkerton detectives to literally wage war against his own employees. The result was a pitched battle that left dozens of workers dead and hundreds wounded. Carnegie didn't just break the strike. He broke the entire labor movement for decades. And the best part? He used the money saved from not paying fair wages to build libraries and universities, then expected people to thank him for his generosity. It's like if Jeff Bezos worked his warehouse employees to death, then built hospitals and acted like he was saving humanity. Vanderbilt, the railroad magnate, was part of that imperial group of capitalists who best rode the nation during the Gilded Age. But Commodore Vanderbilt didn't earn his title through naval service. He earned it by treating American commerce like a pirate would treat merchant ships. Vanderbilt's favorite trick was to buy up competing railroad lines, then deliberately run them into the ground to eliminate competition. He'd sabotage bridges, bribe government officials, and even hire thugs to physically attack rival railroad crews. But his masterpiece of corruption was the Erie War, a financial battle where Vanderbilt tried to corner the market on a railroad company by buying up all the stock. His opponents just printed more stock certificates, literally counterfeiting their way out of his monopoly attempt. The result was open financial warfare that nearly crashed the entire American economy. J. Pierpont Morgan was the ultimate financial power broker of the era, and he didn't just loan money. He owned presidents, senators, and entire industries. Morgan's specialty was creating artificial panics, then swooping in to buy up distressed assets for pennies on the dollar. The Panic of 1907? Morgan helped orchestrate it, then saved the economy by consolidating even more power into his own hands. Here's how corrupt this system was. When the U.S. government needed to finance the Spanish-American War, they had to borrow money from Morgan at whatever terms he dictated. The American government was literally paying interest to a private citizen for the privilege of defending the country. And Morgan's rescue packages always came with strings attached. He'd save companies from bankruptcy, then install his own people as management, essentially turning American industry into his personal empire. Jay Gould was hands down the worst of the robber barons, a man of minimal morals who was entirely self-made. If the other robber barons were ruthless businessmen, Gould was a straight-up sociopath with a talent for finance. Gould's specialty was stock manipulation that would make modern insider traders look like Sunday school teachers. He'd spread false rumors about companies, manipulate telegraph communications, and even bribe journalists to print fake news that would move stock prices. His most infamous scheme was trying to corner the gold market in 1869. Gould convinced President Grant's brother-in-law to help manipulate government gold sales, then bet everything on gold prices rising. When the scheme started to unravel, Gould didn't just lose money. He nearly destroyed the entire American economy. But here's the kicker. Even when his schemes failed catastrophically, Gould always found a way to profit. He'd short his own stocks right before his manipulations were exposed, making money on the collapse he caused. These robber barons represented a gilded age of corruption, monopoly, and rampant individualism, using their wealth to monopolize huge industries. But their methods aren't ancient history. They're the blueprint for modern billionaire behavior. 1. Eliminate competition through predatory pricing, Amazon specialty. 2. Corrupt government officials to change regulations, modern lobbying. 3. Use violence when economics isn't enough, private security, lawsuits. 4. Manipulate markets through information control, social media algorithms, financial news. 5. Rebrand exploitation as innovation, gig economy, disruption. The robber barons exploited workers, often children, with low wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions. Today's billionaires just outsourced that exploitation to countries with fewer labor protections. The Gilded Age proved that American capitalism isn't about free markets. It's about rigging markets so thoroughly that competition becomes impossible. Every tech monopoly, every pharmaceutical price-fixing scheme, every environmental disaster caused by corporate greed is just the robber baron playbook with better public relations. The real tragedy? These criminals are taught in business schools as innovative entrepreneurs. Students study Rockefeller's monopoly tactics, Carnegie's labor suppression, and Morgan's market manipulation as business strategy, rather than criminal conspiracy. The robber barons didn't just steal money. They stole the entire concept of ethical business and replaced it with a system where cruelty becomes a competitive advantage. Here's where the story gets really dark, folks. We've seen how the wealthy accumulated their fortunes through centuries of murder, theft, and exploitation. But how do they keep it? How do generation after generation of criminals avoid consequences? Simple. They don't break the law, they buy it, own it, and rewrite it. Let's start in medieval England, where the concept of justice first got its price tag. The English court system wasn't about determining guilt or innocence. It was about determining who could afford the best outcome. Rich defendants could pay for trial by champion, literally hiring professional fighters to battle their accusers to the death. Can't afford a champion? Too bad, you're guilty by default. It's like if modern courts let you hire Navy SEALs to represent you in legal combat while poor defendants had to fight themselves. But it gets worse. Wealthy nobles could purchase letters of pardon directly from the king, essentially get out of jail free cards for any crime, including murder. Mass murder your peasants? That'll be 500 gold pieces, please. The church got in on the action too with indulgences. literally buying forgiveness for crimes from God himself. Murder, rape, theft, all forgivable if you had enough coin for the collection plate. Fast forward to the American frontier, where wealthy cattle barons, mining companies, and railroad tycoons turned law enforcement into their private security services. Sheriff's departments weren't protecting citizens. They were protecting capital. Cattle barons would elect their own sheriffs, who would then enforce whatever laws benefited wealthy landowners while ignoring crimes committed by their bosses. The most twisted example? Company towns, where corporations owned everything: the stores, the houses, the sheriff's office, even the currency. Workers weren't just employees. They were literally prisoners in a corporate-owned police state. Try to organize a union, the company sheriff would arrest you for disturbing the peace. Try to leave, you'd be shot for theft of company property, your labor. It's like if Amazon owned the entire city of Seattle, printed their own money that only worked at Amazon stores, and had Jeff Bezos's personal security forces serving as the official police department. Speaking of corporate security, let's talk about the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Basically the world's first private military contractor specializing in corporate warfare against American citizens. Wealthy industrialists would hire Pinkerton agents to infiltrate labor unions, sabotage strikes, and murder union organizers. These weren't security guards. They were professional killers with badges and legal immunity. The Homestead strike wasn't just Carnegie crushing his workers. It was a full military assault using private mercenaries armed with Winchester rifles and Gatling guns. The Pinkertons killed more American workers than most foreign wars, and it was all perfectly legal because the rich had bought the law. Today's wealthy don't need to hire Pinkerton agents. They've got something even more effective. Armies of lawyers who can tie up anyone in legal proceedings until they run out of money to fight back. Here's how it works. A billionaire commits a crime. Instead of facing justice, they hire 50 lawyers to file thousands of motions, appeals, and countersuits. The victims, who can't afford to match that legal firepower, either settle for pennies or go bankrupt trying to get justice. It's legal terrorism, using the court system as a weapon to financially destroy anyone who dares to seek accountability. The wealthy don't need to win in court. They just need to make justice so expensive that nobody can afford it. But the real masterpiece of legal corruption is the tax system. The wealthy didn't just avoid paying their fair share. They rewrote the entire tax code to make tax avoidance not just legal, but patriotic. Here's a fun fact. Amazon paid zero federal taxes in 2018 despite making $11 billion in profits. How? They hired more tax accountants than most companies have total employees, creating a labyrinth of loopholes, offshore accounts, and legal fiction that would make medieval lawyers weep with envy. Meanwhile, working families pay higher effective tax rates than billionaires. It's not tax avoidance, it's legalized theft, where the people who can most afford to contribute to society are legally exempt from doing so. And if you really want to see how completely the wealthy have corrupted justice, look at the private prison system. Corporations now make money by keeping people locked up, creating a financial incentive to increase incarceration rates. Private prison companies lobby for harsher sentences, mandatory minimums, and criminalization of poverty-related offenses. They've turned human suffering into a publicly traded commodity. It's slavery with extra steps and better marketing. But perhaps the most insidious form of legal corruption is regulatory capture. When the industries being regulated gain control over the agencies that are supposed to regulate them. The FDA is packed with former pharmaceutical executives. The SEC is staffed by former Wall Street bankers. The EPA is run by former oil company executives. It's like hiring the fox to guard the henhouse, then acting surprised when all the chickens disappear. These regulatory agencies don't prevent corporate crime. They provide legal cover for it. They create the appearance of oversight while actually facilitating the very crimes they're supposed to prevent. And at the very top of this corrupted system sits the Supreme Court, which has spent the last several decades systematically dismantling any legal protection for ordinary citizens while expanding the rights of corporations. Citizens United didn't just allow unlimited corporate political spending. It legalized the complete purchase of American democracy. Corporations can now spend unlimited amounts to buy elections, while individual citizens are limited to small donations that get drowned out by corporate cash. The court ruled that money is speech, but somehow never got around to explaining why poor people don't deserve to have a voice in their own democracy. And if domestic legal corruption wasn't enough, the wealthy have created an international network of legal havens where any crime can be made legal for the right price. The Panama Papers revealed a global system of shell companies, fake foundations, and offshore accounts that allow the wealthy to commit crimes in one country, hide the money in another, and face prosecution in neither. It's not just tax avoidance. It's a parallel legal system where the wealthy play by completely different rules than everyone else. Here's the ultimate lesson. The wealthy didn't just buy individual judges or corrupt specific laws. They corrupted the entire concept of justice itself. In a system where legal outcomes are determined by who can afford the best lawyers, the wealthiest criminals become the most law-abiding citizens, while the poorest victims become the most frequent criminals. Justice isn't blind. She just charges so much for her services that only the wealthy can afford to see her. You think modern family drama is bad? Wait until you hear about what happens when billions of dollars are at stake and the only thing standing between you and infinite wealth is your own blood relatives. Throughout history, the wealthiest families have proven that there's no bond stronger than greed, and no hatred deeper than the kind reserved for siblings who might inherit what you think is yours. Remember the Pazzi conspiracy of 1478? This wasn't just political assassination. It was family business gone genocidal. The attempt to kill Lorenzo and his brother Giuliano during Easter services wasn't just about political control. It was about determining which bloodline would control the Medici banking empire. But here's the part they don't teach in art history. The surviving Medici family members didn't just mourn Giuliano's death. They used it as justification to systematically eliminate entire rival family lines. Lorenzo ordered the execution of not just the conspirators, but their children, their cousins, and anyone else who might theoretically have a claim to Medici wealth in future generations. It's like if Bill Gates decided to murder not just Jeff Bezos, but every member of the Bezos family tree going back 3 generations, just to make sure nobody could ever challenge Microsoft's dominance. Let's talk about the Habsburg dynasty, Europe's most powerful royal family for over 600 years. How did they maintain their wealth and power? By marrying their own relatives so obsessively that they literally bred themselves into genetic deformity. The famous Habsburg jaw wasn't just a cosmetic quirk. It was physical evidence of a family so obsessed with keeping wealth in the bloodline that they'd rather produce mentally disabled, physically deformed heirs than risk sharing power with outsiders. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king, was so inbred that he couldn't chew his own food, speak clearly, or produce heirs. But hey, at least the family fortune stayed in the family, right? Modern wealthy families still do this. They just use legal instruments instead of literal incest. Family trusts, interlocking board memberships, and strategic marriages within the same social class. It's genetic isolation with better public relations. Jay Gould, that minimal morals robber baron we talked about earlier, left behind a fortune of about $72 million when he died in 1892, roughly $2.2 billion today. What happened next proves that wealth doesn't just corrupt individuals. It corrupts entire family trees. Gould's children immediately went to war against each other. George Gould tried to maintain his father's railroad empire while his siblings systematically undermined him through lawsuits, stock manipulation, and corporate sabotage. It wasn't sibling rivalry. It was financial warfare using the family fortune as ammunition. The beautiful irony? By the time they finished destroying each other, they'd squandered most of the fortune their father had murdered and stolen to accumulate. The Gould family went from being one of America's wealthiest dynasties to relative obscurity in just 2 generations. All because they couldn't stop trying to kill each other long enough to enjoy their blood money. Fast forward to the 1970s and the Getty oil fortune. J. Paul Getty was once the richest man in America, worth about $6 billion in today's money. But when his 16-year-old grandson was kidnapped in Italy and the kidnappers demanded a $17 million ransom, Getty's response was instructive. He refused to pay, not because he didn't have the money, but because he was worried it would encourage more kidnappings of his other grandchildren. When the kidnappers cut off the kid's ear and mailed it to a newspaper, Getty finally agreed to pay, but only $2.2 million, the maximum tax-deductible amount. He made his son pay the rest with interest. This is what extreme wealth does to families. It turns parents into accountants calculating the cost-benefit analysis of their own children's lives. But the Getty curse didn't stop there. The family has been plagued by drug overdoses, mysterious deaths, and inheritance battles that make Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. Several Getty heirs have died under suspicious circumstances, always right around the time major inheritance decisions were being made. You know Mars Candy Bars? That sweet, innocent chocolate company? The Mars family, worth about $94 billion today, has turned inheritance into a blood sport that would make medieval kings proud. The current generation of Mars heirs don't just compete for market share. They actively sabotage each other's business ventures, spread false rumors to damage each other's reputations, and use private investigators to dig up dirt on their own siblings. But here's the really twisted part. They maintain this facade of being a wholesome family business while running surveillance operations against each other that would make the CIA jealous. Family board meetings aren't business discussions. They're psychological warfare sessions where blood relatives try to financially destroy each other while smiling for the cameras. Rupert Murdoch built a media empire worth over $17 billion. But the real story is how his children have weaponized that empire against each other in the ultimate inheritance battle. Each Murdoch heir controls different parts of the media empire and uses their platforms to wage public relations wars against their siblings. They don't just fight over money, they fight using newspapers, television networks, and social media platforms as weapons. Imagine having your own brother run hit pieces about you on Fox News while you retaliate by having the Times of London publish embarrassing stories about his personal life. It's family dysfunction with global reach and nuclear-grade media weaponry. The Walton family, worth over $230 billion from their Walmart empire, proves that you can't buy functional family relationships, no matter how much money you have. Sam Walton's heirs have spent decades engaged in legal warfare over everything from foundation control to real estate development. They've hired private armies of lawyers, accountants, and investigators to spy on each other and build cases for future inheritance challenges. But the most disturbing part? They've turned their employees into weapons in their family wars. Different Walmart divisions get funding or resources cut depending on which family member is winning the internal power struggle that week. Millions of workers' livelihoods depend on the mood swings of billionaire siblings who hate each other. Today's wealthy families have turned inheritance into a military science. They don't just write wills. They create legal structures so complex that it takes armies of lawyers years to untangle them. Here's how it works. Wealthy parents create dozens of shell companies, family trusts, and offshore accounts, then give their children conflicting information about which entities control what assets. The result is guaranteed family warfare that can last for decades after the parents die. It's intentional chaos designed to keep the family fighting each other instead of challenging the system that created their wealth in the first place. As long as the heirs are busy trying to murder each other financially, they won't have time to question how daddy made all that money in the first place. Here's what's really twisted about wealth inheritance. It doesn't just corrupt individuals. It destroys the fundamental human capacity for trust, love, and family connection. Modern corporate conglomerates use this exact structure. Amazon uses predatory pricing to eliminate competition, the protection racket, then provides legitimate services through the monopoly they created through illegal means. The only difference between Yakuza families and modern corporations is that the Yakuza were more honest about what they were doing. Pablo Escobar, at his peak, was making $420 million per week from cocaine sales. But what made him truly dangerous wasn't the drugs. It was how effectively he transformed drug money into legitimate political and economic power. Escobar didn't just bribe politicians. He became one. He didn't just corrupt the system. He rebuilt the system with himself at the center. He constructed hospitals, schools, and housing projects, making himself more popular with poor Colombians than the actual government. But here's the scary part. Escobar's methods for converting criminal wealth into legitimate power are identical to what modern billionaires do. Philanthropy, political donations, infrastructure projects. It's all about using wealth to buy social legitimacy regardless of how that wealth was acquired. The difference between Escobar and Jeff Bezos isn't the methods they use to accumulate and protect wealth. The difference is that Escobar's underlying business model was obviously illegal, while Bezos's underlying business model is legal exploitation that produces identical social outcomes. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russian state assets worth trillions of dollars were essentially up for grabs. The men who seized those assets, the oligarchs, combined old Soviet criminal networks with new capitalist financial techniques to create wealth on an unprecedented scale. These weren't businessmen who became criminals or criminals who became businessmen. They were criminal businessmen from day one, using violence, corruption, and market manipulation as standard operating procedures. But here's what makes the Russian oligarchs so important to our story. They proved that the distinction between criminal and legitimate wealth is purely cosmetic. Once you have enough money, you can buy legitimacy, respectability, and legal immunity. Russian oligarchs own major sports teams, world-class art collections, and prestigious real estate in London and New York. They're received at the highest levels of international society, despite everyone knowing exactly how they made their money. Today's Mexican drug cartels aren't just criminal organizations, they're multinational corporations that happen to sell illegal products. The Sinaloa cartel has sophisticated supply chain management, international logistics networks, advanced accounting systems, and professional human resources departments. They use legitimate businesses for money laundering, employ lawyers and accountants, and maintain public relations operations. But here's the terrifying part. Their business practices are increasingly indistinguishable from legitimate multinational corporations. They use violence to eliminate competition, just like Standard Oil, corrupt government officials, just like every major industry, and exploit workers in dangerous conditions for minimal pay, just like Amazon warehouses. The only difference is that one business model is legal and the other isn't. But the human suffering produced by both is remarkably similar. Which brings us to the ultimate money laundering empire, the global financial system itself. Major banks routinely launder money for drug cartels, terrorist organizations, and organized crime families. When they get caught, they pay fines that represent a tiny fraction of the profits they made from criminal activities, then go right back to laundering money. HSBC was caught laundering billions for Mexican drug cartels. The penalty? A fine equal to 5 weeks of profits. Deutsche Bank laundered $20 billion for Russian oligarchs. The penalty? A fine they could pay from petty cash. The global financial system isn't preventing money laundering. It's facilitating it on an industrial scale while maintaining plausible deniability through regulatory theater. Here's the ultimate lesson. The distinction between criminal wealth and legitimate wealth is a marketing problem, not a moral one. Every major fortune in history started with activities that would be considered criminal by the standards of civilized society. The families that survived and thrived were the ones who successfully laundered their reputations along with their money. They endow universities that don't ask questions about where the endowment money came from. They fund museums that display their stolen artifacts as cultural heritage. They establish foundations that turn tax avoidance into charitable deduction. The wealthy don't just launder money. They launder history itself, transforming stories of murder, theft, and exploitation into inspirational tales of entrepreneurship and philanthropy. Today's organized crime families don't carry guns. They carry briefcases. They don't break kneecaps, they break economies. They don't run protection rackets. They run private equity firms. But the fundamental business model hasn't changed. Use superior resources and willingness to inflict suffering to eliminate competition, then extract maximum profit from captive markets while using wealth and influence to avoid consequences. The mafia went legitimate by learning business techniques. Business went criminal by adopting mafia techniques. And now we live in a world where it's impossible to tell the difference between organized crime and organized commerce. Here's where our story takes a dark psychological turn. We've spent 7 hours talking about how the wealthy destroy others to gain and maintain their fortunes. Now let's talk about how extreme wealth ultimately destroys the wealthy themselves, turning them into paranoid, isolated, spiritually bankrupt prisoners in their own golden cages. Let's start with Howard Hughes, who went from dashing aviator and Hollywood producer to a germophobic recluse who spent his final years naked, refusing to cut his hair or fingernails, watching the same movie over and over while living on a diet of chocolate bars and milk. Hughes had everything money could buy: airplanes, movie studios, casinos, politicians, beautiful women. But extreme wealth didn't liberate him. It imprisoned him in a fortress of paranoia where everyone was a potential threat to his fortune. By the end, Hughes was so terrified of losing his wealth that he couldn't trust anyone enough to leave his room. He had billions of dollars but couldn't enjoy a simple meal with friends because he was convinced everyone was trying to poison him for his money. The man who owned airlines was afraid to fly. The man who discovered Hollywood stars was afraid to be seen in public. The man who could buy anything was afraid to touch anything because it might be contaminated. This is what extreme wealth does to the human psyche. It transforms natural social instincts into survival paranoia, turning every relationship into a potential threat and every interaction into a financial calculation. When you have billions of dollars, you can't have normal human relationships. Every friendship is potentially fake. Are they spending time with you or with your money? Every romantic partner is potentially a gold digger. Every business associate is potentially planning to rob you. But here's the twisted part. These paranoid fears are completely rational. But this creates another psychological trap. If you're personally responsible for solving society's problems, you can never rest, never retire, never stop making decisions about other people's lives. Philanthropy becomes another job, another source of stress, another reason why everyone wants something from you. Modern wealthy people live under constant surveillance, and not just from security systems designed to protect them, but from financial monitoring systems designed to track their wealth, legal compliance systems designed to prevent crimes, and media attention that turns their private lives into public entertainment. They have less privacy than prison inmates. Every purchase is tracked, every location is monitored, every relationship is investigated. They can buy anything except anonymity. The irony is perfect. In their quest to accumulate enough wealth to buy freedom, they've created lives with less freedom than people who have nothing to lose. Here's the ultimate question that haunts every wealthy person in their private moments. Was destroying their own humanity worth the money? They have billions of dollars but no real friends. They have global influence but no peace of mind. They have everything money can buy but nothing money can't destroy. The wealthy don't just rob other people, they rob themselves. They trade their capacity for love, trust, joy, and human connection for numbers in bank accounts. They sacrifice their souls on the altar of their spreadsheets. And the cruelest irony of all? Most of them can't stop. Extreme wealth accumulation becomes an addiction more powerful than any drug, and the withdrawal symptoms, losing status, power, and identity, are more terrifying than continuing the cycle of psychological self-destruction. They're not living. They're just managing their net worth until death finally balances their books. The ultimate tragedy of extreme wealth isn't what it does to the poor, it's what it does to the rich. It transforms human beings into walking bank accounts, families into financial instruments, and life itself into a balance sheet. The wealthy built their own prisons, hired their own guards, and threw away their own keys. And the saddest part? They call it success. All right, we've journeyed through 4,000 years of wealth-based criminality, and now we arrive at the present day, where tech billionaires have perfected every evil technique from history and wrapped them in hoodies and motivational quotes about changing the world. These digital robber barons didn't invent greed, exploitation, or monopolistic control. They just figured out how to scale medieval feudalism to planetary proportions using code instead of swords. Mark Zuckerberg, the surveillance king of the digital age. Let's start with Zuckerberg, who built the largest surveillance apparatus in human history and convinced people to pay him for the privilege of being spied on. Facebook isn't a social media platform. It's a psychological manipulation machine designed to extract every possible piece of information about human behavior, then sell that information to anyone willing to pay for the ability to influence human decision-making. But here's where Zuckerberg reveals his medieval mindset. When faced with evidence that Facebook was being used to manipulate elections, spread genocide-inciting propaganda, and drive teenagers to suicide, his response wasn't to fix the problems, it was to hire better public relations firms to manage the criticism. It's the exact same strategy used by every robber baron in history. When your business model causes massive human suffering, don't change the business model, change the narrative about the business model. Zuckerberg has created a global kingdom where 3 billion subjects provide free labor, content creation, while paying taxes, personal data, to a government, Facebook's algorithm, that they have no voice in controlling. It's feudalism with Wi-Fi. Amazon looks like a retail company, but it's actually a surveillance and labor exploitation empire that would make 19th century plantation owners weep with envy. Bezos has created a system where workers are monitored by AI systems that track their bathroom breaks, warehouse movements, and productivity metrics in real time. Amazon warehouses aren't workplaces. They're human battery farms designed to extract maximum value from human bodies while providing minimum compensation. But the real genius of Bezos' system is how he's convinced customers to become unpaid surveillance agents for his empire. Every Alexa device is a listening post. Every Amazon purchase creates a data profile. Every Prime delivery maps your social and professional networks. Bezos has achieved what no dictator in history ever managed. He's built a totalitarian surveillance state that people beg to join and pay monthly fees to maintain. And when warehouse workers try to unionize, Amazon hires the same union-busting firms that Standard Oil used in the 1900s. When competitors try to challenge Amazon's monopoly, Bezos uses predatory pricing tactics that would make John D. Rockefeller proud. The methods haven't changed, they've just been automated and scaled to global proportions. Musk has mastered the art of using futuristic rhetoric to distract from present-day exploitation. While he talks about saving humanity through electric cars and Mars colonization, his companies are built on government subsidies, worker exploitation, and market manipulation. Tesla's factories have injury rates higher than most manufacturing industries, but Musk brands them as revolutionary workplaces. His employees work under conditions that would violate labor laws in most developed countries, but he calls it hardcore work culture. And when workers complain, Musk fires them via Twitter, then makes jokes about their unemployment. When regulators investigate his companies, he responds with memes and cryptocurrency manipulation that would make Jay Gould jealous. But here's Musk's real innovation. He's figured out how to make exploitation seem aspirational. His fans don't see worker abuse, they see disruption. They don't see market manipulation, they see innovation. Musk has weaponized the mythology of entrepreneurship to make criminal behavior seem visionary. Google's motto used to be, "Don't be evil." They quietly dropped that motto around the same time they became evil. Google controls more information about human behavior than any government in history. They know what you search for before you search for it. They can predict your thoughts, influence your decisions, and shape your worldview through algorithmic manipulation. But here's where Google reveals its totalitarian ambitions. They don't just collect information, they control what information exists. Google can make information disappear from human knowledge by removing it from search results. They can make false information seem true by promoting it in search rankings. Google has achieved what every dictator in history dreamed of: the ability to control not just what people think, but what people are capable of thinking. And when governments try to regulate their power, Google threatens to shut down services that entire economies depend on. It's digital extortion on a planetary scale. Apple has created the most profitable captive market in human history by building beautiful prisons and convincing customers that their chains are fashion accessories. The Apple ecosystem isn't about providing better technology. It's about creating technological addiction and dependence. Once you're locked into Apple's system, switching to competitors becomes financially and practically impossible. But here's Apple's genius. They've made their exploitation feel premium. People pay extra for the privilege of being trapped in Apple's ecosystem. They compete to buy products that restrict their freedom and call it luxury. Apple has achieved what no company in history ever managed. They've made customers grateful for their own exploitation. The most terrifying thing about tech billionaires isn't any individual company. It's how they're all connected through interlocking relationships, shared investments, and coordinated strategies. The PayPal founders Musk, Thiel, Hoffman, and others didn't just build separate companies. They built an interconnected empire where each company provides services, data, or protection for the others. It's like the old railroad monopolies, but instead of controlling physical transportation, they control digital infrastructure that every aspect of modern life depends on. When one tech company faces regulatory pressure, the others coordinate their response. When one faces competition, the others help eliminate it. When one needs political influence, the others provide financial resources. They're not separate businesses competing in a free market. They're divisions of a single techno-feudal empire masquerading as innovation. Here's the most insidious part of the tech economy. It's built on a form of digital slavery where people provide free labor, creating content, generating data, training algorithms, while tech companies capture all the economic value. Every social media post, every search query, every online purchase is unpaid work that generates profits for tech billionaires. Billions of people spend hours every day creating value for tech companies while receiving no compensation. But unlike historical slavery, digital slavery is voluntary. Tech companies have convinced people that providing free labor is actually entertainment, social connection, and personal expression. It's the ultimate con game. Convince your slaves that their slavery is freedom, then charge them for the privilege of being enslaved. Tech companies don't just collect data. They use that data to build algorithmic weapons designed to influence human behavior on a massive scale. Facebook's algorithm can determine election outcomes by controlling what political information users see. YouTube's recommendation algorithm can radicalize millions of people by gradually exposing them to extremist content. TikTok's algorithm can influence an entire generation's worldview by controlling what cultural messages they absorb. These algorithms aren't neutral tools. They're weapons of mass psychological manipulation designed to benefit their creators at the expense of human well-being and democratic governance. The ultimate tech billionaire fantasy is the metaverse, virtual worlds where they can be literal gods, controlling every aspect of digital reality according to their whims. But here's the twisted logic. Tech billionaires are building virtual escape hatches from the real-world problems their companies created. They're offering digital fantasies to distract from physical suffering, virtual relationships to replace human connections they destroyed, and artificial experiences to substitute for natural ones they've monetized out of existence. The metaverse isn't innovation, it's admission of guilt. They know their technology has made the real world worse, so they're trying to sell people artificial alternatives rather than fix the problems they caused. Every strategy used by historical robber barons has been perfected by tech billionaires. The monopoly creation, eliminate competition through acquisitions and predatory practices. Regulatory capture, hire former government officials and fund political campaigns. A labor exploitation, extract maximum value while providing minimum compensation. Information control, shape public narrative through media ownership and algorithmic manipulation. A government dependence, make their services so essential that regulation becomes impossible. The only difference is speed and scale. Where it took Rockefeller decades to build a monopoly, tech companies can eliminate global competition in a few years through network effects and data advantages. We're not living in a technological revolution, we're living through the establishment of digital feudalism, where tech billionaires are the new lords, their platforms are the new fiefdoms, and users are the new serfs providing free labor in exchange for the privilege of existing in their digital kingdoms. The wealth accumulation techniques haven't changed in 4,000 years. The only thing that's changed is the user interface. And just like every wealthy elite before them, tech billionaires are convinced they're saving the world while they're actually destroying it. One algorithm, one data harvest, one human connection at a time. The digital revolution didn't democratize power. It concentrated power in fewer hands than ever before in human history. And those hands are typing code that will determine the future of human consciousness itself. So here we are, minutes deep into the darkest rabbit hole in human history. We've traveled from ancient Mesopotamian kings to Silicon Valley tech lords, from medieval poison rings to algorithmic manipulation, from plantation slavery to digital serfdom. And if you're still with me after this journey through humanity's greatest horror story, you're probably asking the same question I am. What the hell is wrong with us as a species that we keep letting this happen? The eternal pattern. Why nothing ever changes. Here's the most terrifying thing we've discovered. Every single technique for accumulating and maintaining extreme wealth has remained fundamentally unchanged for 4,000 years. The tools got more sophisticated, the scale got larger, but the core strategies are identical. 1. Claim divine right or natural superiority. Kings said God chose them. Billionaires say markets chose them. 2. Eliminate competition through violence or manipulation. Assassinations became hostile takeovers. 3. Corrupt legal and political systems. Bribing kings became lobbying politicians. 4. Control information and narratives. Royal decrees became algorithm manipulation. 5. Make the system so complex that resistance seems impossible. Divine mystery became financial complexity. Every generation thinks they're dealing with unprecedented greed and corruption. But we're not. We're dealing with the same fundamental disease that's been eating humanity alive since the first person figured out how to accumulate more resources than they could personally use. Let's talk numbers that'll make your head spin. The combined wealth of the world's richest 1% equals the wealth of the poorest 3.8 billion people. That's not just inequality. That's a crime scene where half of humanity has been robbed so thoroughly that they're living on the economic equivalent of crime scene tape. But the real price isn't just financial. It's what extreme wealth accumulation has cost us as a species. Every climate crisis, every mass extinction, every poisoned river is the direct result of wealthy individuals and corporations choosing short-term profits over long-term survival. The planet isn't dying from natural causes. It's being murdered for quarterly earnings reports. Every failing democracy, every stolen election, every corrupted government is the direct result of extreme wealth concentrating political power in the hands of people who view other human beings as expendable resources. Every culture war, every tribal conflict, every breakdown in human solidarity is the direct result of wealthy elites using division as a strategy to prevent unified resistance to their exploitation. Every epidemic of depression, anxiety, and suicide in developed countries correlates directly with increasing wealth inequality. Extreme wealth accumulation doesn't just rob people of resources. It robs them of hope, dignity, and the belief that life has meaning beyond economic productivity. Here's what we need to understand. Extreme wealth accumulation isn't just greed. It's a psychological addiction that's more powerful and destructive than any drug ever created. Wealthy addicts don't just hurt themselves. They hurt everyone around them, then use their wealth to avoid consequences for the harm they cause. They're functional addicts who have enough money to make their addiction everyone else's problem. And just like any addiction, it's progressive. The amount of wealth needed to satisfy the craving keeps increasing. Millionaires need to become billionaires. Billionaires need to become 100 billionaires. The addiction is never satisfied because satisfaction would mean stopping the accumulation, and stopping would mean confronting the human wreckage they've created. But here's the most twisted part of our story. Most of the people being exploited by extreme wealth have been psychologically conditioned to defend the system that's destroying them. They've been convinced that billionaires are job creators instead of job eliminators. They've been told that extreme wealth inequality is natural instead of artificially created and maintained. They've been programmed to believe that someday they might become billionaires too, so they should protect the system that prevents them from becoming billionaires. It's economic Stockholm syndrome on a global scale. The hostages are defending their captors because they've been convinced that captivity is freedom. Every few generations, people get fed up with extreme wealth inequality and demand change. Sometimes they even get it temporarily. But within a few decades, the same patterns reemerge with new faces and updated techniques. Why? Because we keep treating the symptoms instead of the disease. We regulate specific industries instead of regulating wealth accumulation itself. We punish individual criminals instead of dismantling the systems that reward criminal behavior. We elect new politicians instead of eliminating the economic structures that corrupt all politicians. It's like trying to cure cancer by taking aspirin. The treatment might make you feel better temporarily, but the tumor keeps growing. After minutes of documenting humanity's greatest failures, you might think I'm going to end this story with despair. But here's the thing. Understanding a problem is the first step toward solving it. For 4,000 years, extreme wealth has survived because most people didn't understand how the system really works. They saw the symptoms: poverty, war, environmental destruction, political corruption, but they didn't see the underlying cause. Now, for the first time in human history, we have the tools to see the complete picture. We can trace the connections between ancient royal corruption and modern corporate crime. We can document the psychological mechanisms that turn normal people into wealth-obsessed monsters. We can prove that extreme wealth accumulation isn't an unfortunate side effect of economic systems. It's the primary feature that corrupts everything else. Here's the brutal truth. Humanity is facing an extinction-level choice. We can continue allowing extreme wealth accumulation to concentrate power in the hands of people who view other human beings as disposable resources. Or we can create systems that prioritize human well-being over individual wealth accumulation. There's no middle ground. There's no compromise position. Extreme wealth and human civilization cannot coexist long-term because extreme wealth requires the destruction of everything that makes civilization worthwhile. So what can you do with this knowledge? First, stop participating in the mythology that protects extreme wealth. Stop believing that billionaires are visionary entrepreneurs instead of sophisticated criminals. Stop accepting that wealth inequality is natural instead of artificially created and maintained. Second, understand that every dollar you spend is a vote for the kind of world you want to live in. Every subscription, every purchase, every investment either supports systems that concentrate wealth or systems that distribute it more fairly. Third, recognize that political change without economic change is meaningless. No politician can fix problems created by extreme wealth accumulation without addressing extreme wealth accumulation itself. The story of wealth throughout history teaches us one fundamental truth. The problem isn't that some people have more money than others. The problem is that some people have so much money that they can purchase immunity from the consequences of their actions. When someone can buy their way out of legal consequences, environmental consequences, social consequences, and moral consequences, they stop being human beings operating within social systems. They become forces of nature that destroy everything in their path while feeling justified in doing so. The ultimate price of extreme wealth isn't just what it costs society. It's what it costs the wealthy themselves. In their quest to accumulate infinite resources, they sacrifice their finite humanity. They trade their souls for spreadsheets, their relationships for revenue streams, their consciousness for capital gains. They win the game of wealth accumulation by losing the game of being human. If you've made it this far, you now know something that most people in history never knew. Exactly how the wealthy stay wealthy, exactly what it costs humanity, and exactly why the cycle keeps repeating. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to continue participating in systems that concentrate wealth while hoping that somehow you'll become one of the wealthy exploiters instead of one of the exploited masses? Or are you going to use this understanding to build alternatives that prioritize human well-being over individual wealth accumulation? The choice is yours. But remember, staying neutral in a system designed to concentrate wealth is actually choosing to support that concentration. Inaction is action. Silence is consent. The wealthy have been writing humanity's story for 4,000 years. Maybe it's time for someone else to pick up the pen. Thanks for taking this journey with me. Now go do something that would make a robber baron uncomfortable. And hey, if this opened your eyes to something you didn't see before, smash that like button, subscribe for more stories that'll make you question everything you think you know about how the world really works, and drop a comment telling me. After learning all this, what's the first thing you're going to change about how you interact with the economy? Because the only way this story gets a different ending is if enough people decide to write one. The story of wealth is the story of humanity's greatest failure. The question now is whether we're ready to write a different story.